a good frame?
Yeah, this is good.
Hello everybody and welcome to Hindi. I am Shrishti.
This is Anushka.
And we are back with the part 2 of China episode. We have part 1 already out on Spotify, unfortunately not on the video podcast. But we will link that down for you in the description if you want to know about China, because this is part 2. In part 1 so far we've covered the domestic challenges that China has faced as the time, like when it was rising up to a power, right? We talked about their economic shock therapy, but all of that is in part 1. If you need the part 1 content, go to the part 1. This is part 2. This is a fresh conversation on China.
So, part 1 is more technical based, how China has reached the point that China is today with its thick checkbook, big vast land and never ending greed for more.
Yeah.
And for this episode, we'll try to analyze how A, China has reached this point, B, why is it so into expanding its own land, and C, what are China's insecurities? Why is China, despite being so wealthy, so fulfilled, wants more?
I mean, every coin has a flip side. In part 1, we told you about the great strategies that China had employed to strategically place itself at a global map. And now that it is at a global map, when you put yourself out there are parts of you that the world can see, which you may not want those people to see, right? So we are also going to delve into the insecurities that China has, and which not a lot of people talk about, because the conversations around China are always centered on how China is this big emerging power. But of course it is, but we don't talk about the flip side of the coin.
So we again segue to our first episode. We had discussed how China has placed itself very well using what we call as soft power in politics. It has played a huge role in placing China's position with the Chinese institutions across the world, and how Chinese literature, Chinese movies, there is something called as C-drama, as K-drama as well.
K-drama and C-drama.
So that is how they have used soft power to place themselves as this giant emerging power, which absolutely it is. And for everybody and anybody who has a doubt that China is still a rising power, it has risen.
It has risen, please.
It is a risen power. It is very much in competition with the United States. Might as well take its position as well.
Yeah.
So for that, I think we should start with the Chinese ideology. How China as a country has begun.
Yeah.
Everybody knows the red flag of China.
And that is their real flag, guys. It's not a red flag as in green flag, red flag.
Yeah.
It's an actual red flag.
Damn, that's a good segue. But that is not what we are going to talk about.
Yeah.
China as red flag has brought a lot of values of communism. And communism, basically, when we talk about it in brief, it tells us a society which is stateless, classless, eventually moneyless, and absolute equality to be present. Sounds beautiful, yet utopian.
The implementation is the problem, right? So when the Cold War and everything was happening, it was a world war against commies or the communists, right? But nobody actually really noticed the communists that China was harboring. Our entire focus was on Russian communism. But Chinese communism has come out as a brand of communism that nobody knew could come out. So
for that genesis, I think we should look back on how China has adopted its communism, which has been through an evolutionary process, starting with how Karl Marx has presented it with Engels, and how it went to Soviet Union, had the shadow of Lenin, which emerged as Leninism, which again seeped into China through Mao, came out as Maoism, which now has cooled down to a point of what we can associate as semi-communist, semi-capitalist society, because it's not that no private property exists or international brands can come into China. It is still there, it is very much there, but China has done a very good thing called as special economic zones, again, which has been covered in our first episode. So if anybody wants to revisit that. But when we talk about the controlled capitalist ideals, something very good we can learn from China is they adapt.
Yes.
They adapt to how the situations of the global world are going.
Mhm.
They saw that USSR at the time was losing its power, the communist ideology was losing its shine, the Leninist ideology was losing its shine, and they could see that no country gets rich without the American money. So they very happily opened their arms to Henry
Huh.
Kissinger,
Exactly.
hugged him tight. Richard Nixon was very happy, China was very happy, and that's how the Americans facilitated the Chinese growth, and the Chinese very happily embraced it all.
And if so far in the video you don't realize that we are pol science students, then there is something very wrong with the observation. Okay, so the thing is, in the global world, when we ever talk about communism as an ideology, we think, or we are rather presented that USSR was the torch bearer of this thing. But again, if you, any tradition in the society, the originator eventually loses its power and the student takes over. Any pol science students, if you're listening, Plato and Aristotle are the example, right? So Plato's ideology, while is really good, but we always go back to Aristotle. That's the same thing with China. USSR was the torchbearer, but the new Gen Z formation of communism is presented by China. And they are doing a lot of things on the global scale that we need to talk about. Of course, there are red flags raised in our foreign policy, at least, that there has been encircling of the Indian subcontinent and beyond. Of course, they have military bases every single where. So we want to tackle this topic by topic. We want to not give you a lot of jargonic terms, but make you understand what it is doing in the world. Why China is something that needs to be deeply studied and understood. If there is something rules-based order, if we want to protect, we need to understand China. So Anushka, as we're talking about a rules-based order, and the Chinese apparently have a game out of this, right? Because they are deploying a lot of strategies that essentially is a Faustian bargain, essentially is a game. You play and you lose, and when you lose to China. That's the thing. So what can you tell us about the Chinese game?
So for Chinese game, I think everybody sort of needs to understand that the Chinese thought process has been very expansionary ever since.
Yeah.
There came a time where during the century of humiliation they were oppressed. But again, that does not stop China from pursuing an active expansionary policy. They have done it they are trying to do it in Taiwan. They have done it in Tibet.
Yeah.
For anybody who is unfamiliar, China has this thought process of assuming that the Tibet is the palm, and it has 5 fingers, Arunachal Pradesh and Ladakh being 2 of them. So in that sense, it's not just India that they're against, but there are other countries that they would like to have. It's just the opportunity is not presenting itself.
Yeah.
And for anybody who thinks that China and Russia are bestest of friends, there are regions of China that were not entirely China's, and there are regions of China that are in Russia at this point.
Yeah.
And they want to take it back.
Exactly.
But it's just the opportunity hasn't presented itself yet. And I think that will happen in the future, and it will be very exciting to see how the friendship of the commies turn out. Will comrades remain comrades or not?
Well, the role has technically flipped. When we see China's rise, we see that Chinese leaders were in absolute awe of what USSR was doing at that point. I mean, the Chinese leaders were practically learning from USSR how to take the communist ideology into their own country. Certain leaders have been fans of Stalin as well, right? So that's the thing. But now the equation has flipped, because China is now, due to Russia being isolated from the entire world due to their sanctions and stuff, and that because China is also gaining prominence at the same time, the situation has completely flipped. Now the Russians are more or less, this is just my analysis, at the mercy of the Chinese.
See, I would substantiate that point with the fact that when the Ukraine-Russia war broke out, a lot of American and European companies left. There is a huge market available. Chinese were quick enough to rush it, fill it to the brink, which essentially again poses a question to the Indian market. Then when are we capable enough to fill a void in another country?
Yeah.
There are a lot of markets which are still very untapped, but
course.
it depends on our capabilities whether we'll be able to catch them or not. But that is a discussion for a separate video.
Absolutely.
And the mercy of Russia, the mercy of China on Russia is evident in the fact that when they needed money, China didn't stop the trade. China had their back when they needed it the most. We couldn't do that. We
Yeah.
pose ourselves as biggest Russian friends, but we couldn't do that, and China was able to. A, because they don't give a shit about anybody else, and B, because they are smart enough to know that enemy's friend is enemy and friend's friend. I
His
don't know.
friend.
I don't know what I'm saying at this
No,
point.
so that is correct. Like if your enemy has a friend, that means he's your enemy as well. Like, see, you have to understand international relations as a concept of individual lives, where how our friendship in real life works, slightly nuanced, is that how different countries' diplomatic missions also work, right? So if you take, for instance, the India-China relationship, right? We were actually the first country ever to establish an embassy in the Chinese territory, right? So that should technically make us the greatest friends with Chinese. But we are not. The fact of matter is that there is tension between India and China, which was very evident in the 1962 war. Even after the fact that we extended a Panchsheel agreement, we said that, there's something like a peaceful coexistence that we need to have, and since we are neighbors and stuff, we even raised slogans of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, but apparently it does not work out even between brothers, right? So disputed territories are still there. China has a territory dispute with practically every nation in the world right now.
Again, that associates its point of expansionary policy,
Exactly.
because they have a lot of ambitions,
Yeah.
and being ambitious is not wrong. It's just that your ambition should not harm others, which
Exactly.
is like the sole principle of what Indian growth, I think, portrays with its multiple initiatives,
Of course.
including Sagar, that
Sagar,
is
yeah.
security and growth for all in the region. And if you compare it with Chinese ideology, they have introduced BRI, which
Yeah.
is essentially supposed to be a project that will benefit all the countries, but we are seeing it evolving in a phase of a debt trap policy,
Of course.
more than a investment policy or a helping hand to other nations, so to say.
A big point, at least in the BRI journey, was the takeover of Hambantota port.
Definitely.
That was like a call out for the Indian authorities as well, because Sri Lanka is literally our next door neighbor, and it is Indian Ocean for a reason. India needs to have control on the Indian Ocean, and China knocking our doors at Hambantota by taking over that was a big call out to the Indian security sort of strategy. But we are, I think, well managing it. So in that context, Anushka, I think it's very important for us to place what the string of pearls theory is, and how are we countering it with a diamond necklace. What is it all about?
So when we talk about the string of pearls, you must have heard about multiple military bases.
Yeah.
Different countries sign agreements with friend countries that we would use your ports as military bases with your due permission. And India has a lot of military bases, but China has even more so.
Yeah.
And it is somehow encircling the southern region of India in the Indian Ocean that it looks like a string of pearls.
Pearls, yeah.
And what we are doing is we are also trying to have ports and have military bases in different
Yeah.
countries, and we call it the necklace of diamonds
Right.
because hum hira hai.
Exactly. Why not?
And like when we talk about having such encirclements around India,
Yeah.
you have to, not you per se, but everybody has to understand that it comes from a point where China as a country itself also has insecurities.
Yeah, of course.
So when we talk about such encirclements, we have to understand that a country does something because it has some interests or it has some insecurities, as we call a security dilemma in professional terms, but in layman language, insecurities.
Yeah.
Like you and me, a country can also have insecurities. And what, according to you, do you see the biggest insecurity of China in today's day and age is?
Since we mentioned Sagar, I feel like this is important to bring up the Strait of Malacca, because China is a maritime power. We know that, we've read it in our history books, that the Silk Route trade used to go. It was a big power, and the world trade used to flow around that. So you have to realize the entry to China is through Strait of Malacca. Okay, you can find out that in a map, and fortunately the control essentially of the Strait of Malacca lies in Indian hands as of now, if there are no escalations.
Because of, just to give a context
Huh.
to that, it's because we are developing good relationships with the surrounding countries, and because China is sort of hostile towards them.
Exactly.
Example being Philippines, and example being the Brahmos Strait
Very
which we
important.
had. And I think, taking from that, when we talk about the Chinese aggression, it, because it has its own security dilemmas, it also has a lot of internal issues. One of them being population, and one of them being water. And both we can see is being tackled by an attempt to acquire other people's land. When we talk about that they want to have Taiwan, or
Yeah.
they want Taiwan, so we can cite it out as a historical ego issue as well.
Yeah.
But when they talk when they have acquired Tibet, or they want so more land equals more people equals more babies, because essentially a dropping population. And also because the Brahmaputra river, that essentially gives a lot of water to China, has its origins in China but gives a lot of water in India.
In India, yeah.
So it's a great game that China wants to play, that by posing this theory of five fingers of Tibet, they are not only getting more land, more people, more resources, but more water, which, as we have discussed thoroughly in a lot of discussions in the political science discourse or in the environmental discourse, is that water is going to be the reason for the Third World War.
Of course. See, water is what drives civilization, right? We've studied in our textbooks that Indus Valley civilization, and it was all around the Indus and its tributaries. Water is what's going to cause the Third World War. That is the proposition, because every country is making headways into maritime security. It is absolutely essential. And also for India, we're a country surrounded by water on three of our sides. And for such a powerful country like India, who has such a vast domain to work upon, it is incredibly important that Sagar as an initiative must be noted as a testament to India's peaceful rise.
So, we can say that water with salt or without salt, both is important for a country's
Exactly.
growth. And because, maritime obviously depends on how well you are with other countries,
Yeah.
and how well you manage into international waters, because essentially you cannot create fence boundaries in waters. And maritime control is something that China's insecurities have always posed, because they have again the same issues with Philippines, they have the same issues with Vietnam, they are threatening Japan every other day, they enjoy trade relations with everybody including India, but they do not per se have a very good relationship when we talk about people to people contact, or very good diplomatic relations. And that is something that China as a giant has missed, perhaps.
Yeah.
Which I think US has pretty well done it. I mean, okay, sometimes they do show their
Yeah.
dominant face, but they're not as aggressive as China is.
See, this is the discourse that went on when we talked about that there's being a power shift from the US to the China. This is one thing that we collectively need to recognize, that America at some point has been gentle giant, as long as you adhere to America's economic goals, you're well fine. You will be funded by petrodollars and stuff like that. But China has hands, sticks in both their hands. It is not a stick and carrot game with them. It's sticks and sticks with them. You listen to them, you get a blow. You don't listen to them, you get a blow. That is how Chinese ideology works. And for us to counter that ideology, the entire world is covered in made in India. If we need to secure our made in China, if we need to secure our interests, we need to make in India, which is kudos to the Indian government that we are indigenizing our national security aspect at least.
So with that, I want to quote Swami Vivekanand when he says that life is too short to learn from your mistakes, learn from others as well. And I think we should learn from others' success as well. And China is something that is worth studying, worth knowing more. This is barely scratching the surface of Chinese ideology, Chinese history, Chinese strategies.
Absolutely.
But we want everybody to get excited about it, learn about it, because as important as it is to know our own history and culture and thought process, it is just as important to know our neighbors. And with that, I think my part in this video ends because all the POC things is done by her. So yeah.
So yeah, I would just conclude by saying, as our visionary leaders have also said, you can't change your neighborhood, you have to deal with it. So on that note, I think we will be signing off, and goodbye. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.